Hello, everybody. Welcome to the March 21st occurrence of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is governed by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so please be respectful to everybody, both here in the meeting and in general, because that's a good thing to do. We have an open agenda. That agenda is in the Zoom chat here. If you'd like to contribute, add a topic, something you'd like to discuss, then we will get to that as we go through. Also, as a kind of housekeeping matter, we like to track the attendance of those who are able to make it to our meetings. So if you would go to that agenda link and put your name and organization there, that'll just help us make sure that our meeting times are as inclusive as possible. We currently break our meetings into two, one with a kind of a early US time and a later US time to try to make sure as many people can attend as possible for the Gamma meetings. So your attendance record helps us be able to gauge that. I'll jump in before we get into our main agenda. I'll jump into our recap in case you happen to miss the last meeting. The first topic we chatted about was Mike and Flynn had a discussion about their investigation into gateway mesh interactions. That's one of the things that we're looking to try to shore up before we have a formal release of the Gamma spec. There's a draft there that's been a work in progress for a while, but we are expecting some changes. The kind of core questions still that has yet to be decided upon is which way we want the routing to go. For gateway to mesh interactions, you can either do routing to the front end, the IP, cluster IP for that service, or you can use the back end. And the kind of guiding principle for that discussion has been, what's the least surprising thing going to be for users? And we've discussed some of the options, but the actual changes to be made and added to the spec are yet to be determined. Flynn and Mike, you're both here. Do you want to add anything to the recap here?
I'm sad to have to admit that I've been heads down doing content for what feels like half a dozen different things that are all happening next week. So I have been able to do absolutely nothing about this except for a long and interesting discussion with Danyan around that hit on some of this stuff. And I see that Danyan has commented that he also has feedback on this. So yeah, I think that's Mike. Do you have any? Did you make any progress?
Not much substantial. I was largely focused on Rob's topic later in the agenda for the past week. But yeah, kind of like as a preview though, we are looking at prior art where Ingress supported both endpoint routing as well as kind of like mesh aware routing. So it's possible that we're going to explore like how can we configure one or both options rather than forcing an exclusive only one, because they kind of both have their merits. One's more expected for UX, one has some performance and functionality benefits. So.
Okay. Looks like I'm going to go ahead and, well, if Dane's got some feedback here, so I'll move on to the next topic since that's just the recap. If anybody has thoughts here, feel free to add them to the agenda or open a GitHub discussion or chat in Slack. We had an 070 milestone checkup. Our kind of our soft goal has been to try to get Gateway API, or sorry, get Gamma part of the spec release formally in Gateway API in the 070 release. We felt like after talking with Mike and Flynn, that it's unlikely that we'll be able to figure out the gateway mesh interactions before that timeline. And so with that, we'll look at Danyan's feedback here. So Danyan, thanks for creating the issue. Although I've been involved in Gateway API since branch conception, I'm also been new to Gamma. I find the concept of a route having a parent ref and backend ref to the same service quite confusing. I'm concerned future users will feel the same. Has there been consideration for adding a field to backend ref that can be used to further segment a backend ref? Ooh, that is an interesting idea. Daniel, do you want to add some more context to this?
Yeah. Thanks for the time to discuss this comment. So again, I'm kind of coming at this as a new user, so appreciate all the time that the community has spent trying to evolve Gateway API for the mesh management use cases. I'm also relatively new to service mesh as well. I got involved in Istio early on, then how to do other things, and now more recently getting involved in Istio for Istio and ambient mesh. And with that said, as I've looked at the Gamma related GEPs, I think there's two of them with like the route binding, and I forget the other one, the topic or the title of the other one. But just my mental model around having an HTTP route that the parent is a service and the backend ref is a service. I correlate that as like a routing loop. And I'm just concerned that, again, as a newbie, that others will feel the same way. And so yeah, I just want to bring it up for discussion. And my thought is like, at least the way that I look at the API that I linked there is that, even without mesh, it would be nice if Gateway API, the backend ref, exposed some other field that allowed us to further segment that backend reference, right? So typically that backend reference is a service, but if I want to do a canary where I have, hey, here's my service foo, but that service foo has two different deployments, V1 and V2, and I now want to, do a canary where I'm sending 90% of the traffic to V1 deployment and 10% to V2. All right, everything's looking good. Now let's switch the weights. Even with Gamma aside, just if we look at the backend refs, a backend ref does not have that kind of concept. And I just wanted to kind of throw it out there of like, could we attach some other field that allows us to flexibly sub-segment that backend ref? And in the example I kind of provide is either a label, or if we want to do something more generalized, maybe it's metadata, and it could, within metadata, we could support labels initially and then expand that metadata field as use cases come to fruition.
That is
John.
some, I was going to say that's some great feedback. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. It's good feedback. One thing that wasn't clear to me, though, is this two separate pieces of feedback, or is there some link between these that I'm not following?
I guess the link is my understanding is that the route has a parent ref of a service and a backend ref of the same service, and so I find that confusing, and my understanding is that is done in a way that allows this kind of sub segmentation of a backend, like in this example, where we have the foo service, but there's like two versions of the foo service.
Yeah, I think I more closely follow. I mean, that's one use case. You could match foo service and send to bar service as well. It's not only for sub-segmenting, right? Like the concept is really that service has two parts, and we're splitting that more explicitly here. So I'm not sure, like, even if we added like subsection in the backend ref, for example, and fuzzy on the details of how that works, but I'm sure we can find a way. We still need something as the parent ref to bind to actually match the traffic, right? So it doesn't seem like that alone solves the problem of the confusion between service used in two places. Now, it may be a useful feature for doing canaries and whatnot to not have to create more services or whatever. But at least I don't follow how it solves the parent ref versus backend ref confusion.
Yeah, and I don't want to monopolize the call on this particular piece of feedback, but I guess what I was envisioning was that the parent ref would actually be referencing a gateway, right? And a gateway based on the implementation could be a whole fleet of gateways that are run as a daemon set, right? And we say that, okay, I want to control this traffic for this gateway. Again, could be a fleet of gateways, and then do some type of action to it, right? In this particular example, it's sending a certain amount of traffic to one version of a service and another amount of traffic to another service. So keeping consistent with the route would have a parent ref of a gateway and a backend ref of a service, and then using some new field labels or metadata to sub-segment that traffic that's being forwarded.
So yeah, I'm going to jump in because I got my hand next. But so Daniel, I 100% agree with you that I found the model pretty confusing to start with as well. That's why one of the reasons I made this Miro board that has been around for a while. That is the one that has like, here's how things could work and different use cases that I could see and like the problems that I saw. I think it has been pretty useful for everybody. So yeah, the basically this is sort of all the things I see that are weird about it. I do think that the point that everyone has been making is that when you're using a service mesh currently, people expect the service, the Kubernetes object, to be the service that you're talking about in service mesh. And so there's a very strong sort of user expectation for mesh users that the service is the thing around which the API spins.
Yes.
And I think that that's the reason why, I mean, look, I said basically most of what you have just said previously many times. I'm pretty sure everyone got tired of hearing me say it. And so like what I
don't think I'd go that far, Nick. It was very relevant still,
I think that what we agreed on was that we let this run for a bit and see how this goes and see where this ends up, because I mean, I agree that semantically the naming of having a gateway be a thing that represents a service in a mesh is confusing, because a gateway we've kind of defined as something that does the translation between stuff that has some context and stuff that doesn't. I mean, I think it would make sense to have like a gateway between the outside the mesh and inside the mesh inside the cluster, but the naming means that the thing is logically confusing if we use the gateway in that way. Like I agree, and like we've talked before about a few things, like having a mesh resource, having a mesh service resource instead of just a service resource, or some other stuff like that. And I think all of those things like are possible options, but none of them have the sort of the usability advantages of just using the service object. I hate overloading the service object more. As I said on a number of occasions, I think that the upstream the SIG network reviewers are going to sort of feel a bit the same. And so like what I have said in the past is, if we're going to do this, we're going to need to have a really, really clear value justification and sort of explanation as to why the UX gain is worth the sort of semantic confusion pain. And so so yeah, that's sort of, I wanted to give you like a rough catch up, because yeah, like everything that you're saying like is I think is completely reasonable, and we have talked about it before. So but yeah, you're catching up, so I'm trying to help you catch up as fast as possible. So yeah, have a look at that diagram. That sort of, I think that says some of the stuff that I had said before. And yeah, I think the subsegmenting idea is cool, and it is worth talking more about. Sorry, Flynn.
Honestly, I was just kind of waiting to see how quickly you'd put your hand up on that one. The subsegmenting thing and the idea that you could use something that's not a service as a backend ref is something that has been discussed at least a bit within Buoyant, around the idea that maybe it would make sense to have something that I'll just call a topology resource, where it's not a service, it describes a relationship between services, and could talk about concepts like doing a canary, doing traffic mirroring, doing traffic splitting, doing, other things like that. So that concept is something we've kicked around a bit. It has not gotten to a point that we've had anything concrete to propose around it. But I would tend to emphasize what Nick had said earlier, to the tune of one of the major decisions that came out of all of the beating of dead horses from back when, was that we really do need to go ahead and pick something to implement and run with it and see how far we get and see where it falls off. And using services for that made the most sense. Yeah. And with that, I think, Keith, you had your hand up, but I'm really curious what Mike has to say too.
Yeah, I think everybody's done a really good job of giving some context here. I wanted to add to just note a couple of resources that I think might be helpful in understanding even more context, Daniel. So is the other gap that you were talking about for service mesh and Gamma. It's less so a gap, more so of like initial, well, not a gap, but it's a what and why for service mesh and gateway API. This was the result of a lot of definitions. The gateway API leads were very helpful and asked us to kind of get some short vocabulary together about what we're referring to when we use these words. At one point, there's a document and we had like 100 uses of the word service, and it had 4 or 5 different definitions each time we used the word service. And so this whole service front end, service back end has been kind of one of the foundational definitions in concepts in the Gamma spec. And so I think reading through this service section will be super helpful in understanding kind of how what the difference is between the parent ref invocation of a service versus the backend ref invocation of the service. And the second thing that I want to share is the alternatives considered section. One of the things that I'm actually pretty proud of how I went about doing this with Gamma is, as we were making decisions, we had a doc with a bunch of different options and representations, and we documented that in the actual gap, including the drawbacks and like pros and cons. And you can see kind of why different options weren't selected in this alternatives considered section. These are all, by the way, we mentioned moving forward with service until the wheels fall off. When the wheels fall off, this will be where we return to. If we ever have to choose something different, we'll start with this alternatives considered section and think, is this drawback really as bad as we thought it might be? I'm actually in the middle of doing a clarification gap for binding, and might take some of these things into consideration, but want to try to close time boxes a little bit. Mike, go ahead.
I'll focus purely on the additive subset as a new useful thing for avoiding a duplicate service, like the FuV2 service. This is something that Consul is interested in. I think that it would run into trouble from SIG network reviewers as basically an additional case of you're already hanging too many things off of the service resource. And it sounds like there is an interest upstream in trying to break that up a bit into a more explicit like front end and back end. So I hope that that's something that would be considered if and when that effort moves forward, but I think it would be unlikely to be able to make a good case for getting that in now, considering it's a UX simplification over a thing that's possible rather than something that is not possible currently.
Let's be clear. I think UX simplifications are definitely worthwhile.
Oh yes, oh yes. Like we want it from Consul. It's more of just like it's overloading an already overloaded API, and its services due for a breakup anyway.
The fact that there isn't any way that anybody can see clear to getting changes into service in timeframes sort of shorter than multiple months is definitely a frustration about all of this. But yeah, that may be maybe that is the right way to proceed. Nick, you just unmuted.
I would say years for changes to service, not months.
I have a
The service
charming
object.
I have a
Service
charming and
object.
yeah, I have a charming and possibly naive idea that perhaps it would be possible to bring new things into service quicker than years, although I recognize that there's no possible way to get the old things out of service in less than years. Rob, were you going to mock me further there, or?
No, I have some experience with going through this process, and whether it's good or bad, it's experience. I would say, yeah, there's interest in upstream of splitting out service. There always has been. That's been, how Gateway API came about, really, is service was too complex and ingress wasn't complex enough, roughly. And here we are. I think there's some really interesting stuff happening in upstream. The idea of pulling IP allocation, Antonio talked about that in a previous meeting about pulling that away from service is, step one. Pulling DNS away, that's, also, interesting. These are huge changes. And then bucket them on top of this idea that everything we do in upstream Kubernetes is tied to the Kubernetes release cycle. And Gateway API as a project has said, we're going to support the last 5 Kubernetes minor releases, which is a really long window. So I'm not saying, yes, yeah, we can get some changes in, but the years is probably the realistic time frame. I would love to be more optimistic, but that's where we are right now, I think.
I think it comes down to, at the end, the GA guarantees, right? Like, service is a V1 object. It's going to be there forever. Like, that's what V1 means. Like, where forever is a long enough time, that it may as well be forever. Even if it gets deprecated, right? Like, so I think that's one of the key things is like, practically it's very difficult to change things on a V1 object because you need to do it in the API compatible way. See the many thousands of words written in the API conventions and API changes documentation in the SIG-Arch repo. There's like probably 10 to 20,000 words written on how to make changes to non-breaking changes to APIs correctly. It's really hard. And so I think that I think that breaking things out a little bit at a time is going to be the thing that ends up being the wedges to do that. So I think Dave asked in the chat, should we consider revisit N-5? I think that probably makes some sense. I mean, that decision was made actually after we moved to 3 releases a year. I think there's lots to talk about that. So that was always intended to be more than a year. I could talk for many hours about release cycles and stuff because of the LTS working group that I was in as well. But that is way not for here. So I'll shut up now. Let's hit some other topics. But I just want everyone to know that we definitely are thinking about this.
Awesome. Appreciate everybody chiming in on this topic. And Daniel, if you've got any other questions or clarifications that you need that you'd like to chat with, we are all pretty available in Slack as well. So feel free to reach out there for follow-up. Okay, great. So in interest of time, I'm going to move from the recap into the agenda. First agenda item out, I don't know who said this, but this is a great news that the mesh conformance testing plan has been merged in as provisional. Thank you, big thank you to Michael Beaumont for knocking that out. This is getting us closer to be able to release this into the formal Gateway API. It means that I can continue work on implementation. I have unfortunately been swamped and haven't been able to do that as of late. Though, if other people have more time and are able to are willing to take that, then I'd be happy to split the work or just give the issue over wholesale. But yeah, looking forward to actually implementing this and getting gamma tests running, especially in light of the new conformance profile work. So again, we're happy to see this. I think the rest of these are all other PRs. Any comments on the mesh conformance testing plan before we move on here?
I wrote, this is all related. I added this section. The first one is just a link to the actual PR. I think that now that this is merged, that's sufficient to close issue 1686.
Good question. Let me look.
Yeah. And
I
then,
would tend to agree with that.
Yeah, I agree.
cool.
So I will say close by 1813.
Yay. And then I just opened a small follow-up PR that expands a little bit on the conformance profile bit and re-adds the mention of support levels and how we plan to use those. So I think that whenever that gets reviewed, that should be sufficient to close out 1488. So we should be in good shape for the conformance testing work that we want in the initial gamma release, knowing that like the actual testing implementation can wait till after that.
Phenomenal. Thanks for that, Mike. I'll add those to my list to make sure I get those reviewed as soon as I can.
Awesome.
1860 looks good from here, just for the record.
It's small, yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. My eyes thank you for small follow-up PRs.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on this section? Love seeing forward progress, especially on something as important as conformance testing. So I really appreciate the work being done there. Going once, going twice. Okay. Sold, yes. Daniel, I think we covered most of the sub segmenting topic. Is there anything else like extra that we didn't get to or something that you want to spend time on here?
No, I think we covered it. Since the concept of sub segmenting a backend is not mesh specific, I'm going to create an issue, especially since it sounds like other people are interested in the concept. So I'm going to create an issue. We can bring the discussion there, and then if need be, create the gap and PRs to implement the gap, as long as we all agree.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that issue. I have some thoughts here around like something that Flynn mentioned with a topology, some sort of topology resource, and kind of the idea of a delegated ref, a reference to something that's going to tell you how to do subsetting or something like that. So looking forward to that.
I'd like
to that
to
issue.
let me be clear that since people have used route delegation as a term of art within Gamma and Gateway API before, I want to be clear that we have not been thinking particularly about route delegation. We've been thinking more of other things that could be directly used as a backend ref. I don't think that that's opposed to what you were just saying. I just wanted to be very, very clear on that one since you said delegation.
I appreciate that so much. My vocabulary is being challenged by the variety of different of the overloaded terms that we're using here. So thank you for that save and making sure that everything is clear here.
There are way too many overloaded terms, to be sure.
There are. Okay, so I actually have a conflict coming up in a couple of minutes. So Nick has graciously agreed to take over the sharing responsibilities. I'll still be here for a little bit. But Nick, if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, just so we can have a smooth transition here.
You want to grant me co-host? Or should I use the?
That's, I always forget about that. Yes, I'll grant you host.
You're just supposed to hack your way in, Nick.
I mean, I have the host key. I can, but like, let's do this the right way.
Yeah, there you go. You should be host now.
So we're actually close to the end of the agenda anyway. We have the open issues. Before we move into looking at the open issues, is there anything else that
I
anyone wants
think
to-
we
You-
I think we skipped
skip
the
Rob.
MCS and Gateway API.
we did. I'm sorry.
I'm
Rob.
so offended.
Yeah, you should be.
Clearly, you should be, Rob. Clearly.
Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to this one because honestly, I feel like it is relatively straightforward. I presented this at SIG Multi-Cluster this morning. And actually at previous meeting as well. I don't think there's significant issues from their perspective. I think this is also relatively straightforward from the ingress perspective. Again, this is my bias showing. But the thing that I am most interested in broader discussion is for mesh. Because I know that mesh is the one place in Kubernetes where there is often alternative ways to accomplish multi-cluster routing. And what I am proposing here is fairly strict. And maybe most notably, it says that a service is really intended to refer to cluster local endpoints, which is something that many, or if not most, meshes do not enforce today. I am very interested in some feedback and discussion around this. This is, I think, really going by the understanding of Kubernetes APIs today, but not actually the in practice ecosystem that exists in mesh today, and how we can, make those a little bit closer together without having an unreasonable spec. That would be a good discussion here.
I'm grateful that Alex is on the call because I'm mostly sure that multi-cluster Linkerd does in fact use service resources to refer to services in other clusters.
Yeah, or more specifically, we have endpoints that refer to ingress like gateway IPs and other clusters. So things outside the current cluster.
But we have
Zillion
ser-
plus.
But we have services that refer to the distinct service resources that refer to those endpoints, right?
Yeah, that's right. So we have a service like a cluster, a service in the cluster whose endpoint is a, some external resource.
Yeah, and Cilium service mesh, Cilium cluster mesh also has a similar idea. Costin.
Yeah, Istio obviously is probably the biggest offender on this area. But I think we have agreement, at least for ambient, to fix it and to match the Kubernetes behavior, because we found plenty of problems with our behavior, meaning that we cannot enable Istio cluster-wide, and there are a lot of applications that break, and we don't know which application should break. So I'm 100% supportive of this proposal for Gamma, and I think we can make it work for Istio. The only reservation I have is that we should also support, in addition to that, some way to indicate, cluster local versus global for bring your own name or egress, which we agreed to postpone. So when we start discussing about custom names, we need to reopen this discussion a bit, but probably with the same kind of resolution. I mean, we should have clear in the understanding, if you talk with example.com, that it's egress, cluster local or cluster global, but that's for later.
Yeah, I think there's also some related things there. Like we have the egress sort of GEP effort just starting up now, which, to be clear, I think is probably a similar amount of work overall to the entire Gamma effort to do that correctly. And then B, we also have discussions about things like cluster local and cluster IP gateways for to be able to do hairpinning and things like that for north-south traffic. So there are some existing conversations there that I think will heavily play how we solve them for those use cases will heavily play into how we need to solve them for Gamma.
Costin, did I understand you correctly that you said Istio was a large offender in using services to refer to things outside the cluster, but that therefore you would like to see Gamma be more strict about that?
Yes, I mean, in
Okay.
Istio, when you say food.namespace, it actually means in any cluster, so it spreads the traffic across all clusters.
Gotcha.
If you have a stateful set or some expectations that it will stay local, you're out of luck, and we have some APIs to fine tune it and control it, but most of the time you're out of luck.
Okay. So thanks for that, Rob. Thanks for bringing it to everyone's attention. Yeah, I definitely got to poke some people who are working on Cilium's cluster mesh to get them to sort of review this doc a bit. I haven't had a chance to have a look at it yet. I've been a bit busy with service mesh. Turns out just doing that is a bit hard. Okay, so do we have, do we have any other items that we skipped that
Actually, while we're still on that, I think what I'm really looking for as kind of next steps are sign-offs from, at least one or more Gamma leads. But, because this has an impact on many meshes that have intents of implementing Gateway API, I would love to get as much feedback from that side as possible. I'm really not as concerned about the other aspects of this. So again, I'll probably be coming back next week. I'll try and put some kind of time limit on this. If you have objections, please raise them early. That's my biggest thing. I think I would love to get this in sometime soon. I know there are a couple multi-cluster and gateway related talks at KubeCon. I know we'd love to have something formally defined as what this means, not just for ingress, but also mesh. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, and my comments are basically already addressed in the SIG multi-cluster meeting. So check out the recording there if you want a little more color on this. But there was 2 points that I feel like we reached agreement on around this not ruling out or prohibiting transparent proxy type functionality to redirect .cluster.local traffic off cluster potentially if a mesh is configured in that way. And the other one was that endpoint slices, it is permissible for them to point to a gateway rather than direct pod routing off cluster. So that's something that we're hoping to get clarified a little more explicitly. Right now, it's kind of allowed by omission. So those are also reflected in comments on the PR for this gap.
I just tried to capture the discussion about this in the notes. I would encourage people
I'll
to
add it.
take a look at what I just typed and edit it if you think I got it wrong.
Thanks.
will do? Okay. So I think that brings us to the open issues item. Before we do, does anyone have anything else they need to speak about? Okay. So these are the open mesh issues. I think we've talked about a few of these already today. These few, defining how policy attachment won't be applied to Gamma resources is blocked behind me redefining policy attachment in 1565. You know that your PR has been around too long when you know the number off the top of your head. And I think the static unmanaged gateway mode thing, there's a few tangled up gaps together that I am going to spend some time, hopefully this week or next week, to start trying to untangle them a bit and get something a bit more actionable. And I think the last one here is the binding semantics one that Keith opened earlier that we have already talked about. So I feel like we've actually covered all of these open issues today already. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say about any of these?
I wanted to ask how implementation was looking for people on this call. If anyone's made progress there or lack of progress.
The most recent Edge release of Linkerd actually implements HTTP route pointing to backends for routing. And I will actually, I suppose I should point to the video talking about that we did that has a demo.
With parent ref as a service as well.
Yep.
Nice. Is this the Linkerd fork of HTTP route or the real upstream one?
It's still the Linkerd fork of the HTTP route until the conformance story gets sorted out. So
Okay, so you're effectively the API version away from supporting it, at least to the surface level extent.
to the surface extent, yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that we could talk about beyond that. But yeah, at a surface level, we need to figure out what's up with conformance, which we've just seen some significant progress on. And that's the gate for being able to switch over and use the real API group. Anybody who is interested, I have just pasted a link to the Surface Mesh Academy we did last week talking about this. The first chunk of that video is our CEO, William Morgan, talking through a lot of stuff for 2.13. And the last chunk is me going through a demo, actually using HTTP routes to go and do canaries and AB routing. And yeah, you know, crank it up to double speed or something and skip the bits you don't want to pay attention to.
So in implementing it, I mean, one of the best parts about other people implementing is you find things that when we discuss for 100 hours, we never find. Was everything fairly smooth-ish?
Yeah. I'm also actually, well, never mind. There's a link in the presentation to the GitHub repo where you can see the code that I was using to deploy crap and, you know, the actual resources I was using. And actually, John, since you're on the call, do you want to can you point me to how to try the latest Istio that does this?
Yeah, I'll send it on Slack maybe.
I meant to Slack you about that earlier, and then, like I said, got buried in lots of other things.
Is the Linkerd ones basically just install Linkerd and then do it, but with the
Install
gateway-
Linkerd Edge and then do it. I'll Slack you some more of the.
All right.
Directly
I'll use
Slack
your
you.
product if you use my product.
Well, I'll test your product. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say I'll use it, but I'll definitely test it. But you heard it here first, folks. That's John Howard of Google saying. So we'll hold you to that. And Costin, testing interop would be great at some point. I'm not quite sure we're there just yet, but I actually kind of look forward to that once Gamma has some multi-cluster stuff going. That'll be simultaneously a lot of fun and deeply, deeply terrifying.
100% agreed. Yes.
Yeah.
Cilium wise, we are currently focused on rounding out a bunch of service mesh, other Cilium service mesh features like MPLS and stuff. So yeah, this is on the back burner until later this year for us. I'd love to get to it, but you know, between being a gateway API maintainer and doing the rest of my day job, yeah, bandwidth is short as it is. Thanks for that. Thanks for that, John. That was great. Does anyone else have any implementation updates? Probably almost worth making that a rolling ask in the meeting.
Probably is actually.
Just say implementation updates, please. And if there's none, there's none. But asking is good.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Okay.
Anybody else
Yeah.
have any implementation comments, or was it going once, going twice? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, told. Okay, well, with that, we've kind of covered everything. So unless anyone has anything else they would like to raise, then I think we can call this one done and give everyone somewhere between 2 and 7 minutes back, depending on how long you expect the meeting to go.
Cool. Thanks much, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.